Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi Herman and Corin. So one of the fascinating technologies that has been born out of necessity here in Israel, as so often happens with the inventions developed in the military context that then trickle down into civilian use, is this idea of subterranean imaging and sensing. The particular threats Israel has faced, which necessitated this development, include the tunnels infamously dug by Hamas from Gaza into the areas adjoining the border, and also in Lebanon, where Hezbollah has been digging these tunnels, and likewise the IDF was monitoring and then methodically destroying those tunnels based on these sensing capabilities. It has, as a technology, potentially lots of civilian applications, including mapping the world beneath us, and we've talked about the world of critical infrastructure in many episodes, including the legacy technologies that get put in the ground and don't just vanish magically, and could potentially constitute a hazard. And we can probably think of 100 more if we put our minds to it. But I'd love to know, Herman and Corin, about how this sensing technology actually works in practice. Obviously, the exact stuff in the military context is going to be classified. But from what we do know from what's been made public or the civilian applications, how challenging is it to gain an accurate picture of the infrastructure that lies beneath us? And if there is something really anomalous, like a significant tunnel that's underneath a civilian population center, how tricky is that for the military to actually detect it? I imagine there's a whole bunch of challenges related to penetrating radar or sensing technology against maybe the most resistant of materials, the actual bedrock and what's beneath our feet. Herman and Corin, over to you.
Have you ever stopped to think about the world right beneath our feet? I mean, we spend so much of our lives looking at the horizon, staring at our screens, or navigating the three-dimensional space above the pavement. But there is this massive, complex, and often invisible landscape just a few meters down. In a city like Jerusalem, it is even more intense because you have layers of history literally stacked on top of each other. You are walking on a modern sidewalk, but 10 meters below you might be a Byzantine drainage system, and 5 meters below that, a Second Temple period ritual bath. It is a vertical timeline of human existence.
It is a subterranean puzzle, Corn. And honestly, it is one of the most difficult puzzles to solve because the ground is remarkably good at keeping its secrets. Soil is not just dirt. It is a chaotic mixture of minerals, organic matter, air pockets, and water, all of which conspire to block our view. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have actually been looking forward to this one because the physics of seeing through solid matter is just fascinatingly difficult. It is the ultimate game of hide and seek played against the laws of electromagnetism and geology.
Today's prompt comes from Daniel, and it is a deep dive pun absolutely intended into subterranean imaging and sensing. Daniel is specifically interested in how this technology, which has been sharpened by military necessity here in Israel to find cross-border tunnels, is now trickling down into civilian life. He wants to know how it actually works, the challenges of mapping infrastructure in crowded cities, and how you deal with things like solid bedrock or reinforced concrete.
It is such a timely topic. We always talk about the cloud and the digital world, but our physical reality depends on a labyrinth of pipes, cables, and foundations that we barely understand. The military aspect Daniel mentioned is the extreme version of this. If you are looking for a tunnel 40 meters deep through varied terrain, you are basically trying to find a needle in a haystack where the haystack is made of lead and the needle is trying to stay silent. In the civilian world, we call this subsurface utility engineering, or SUE, and it is becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry as our cities age and crumble.
Right. And it is not just about finding the needle. It is about doing it without digging up the whole haystack. We have all seen those construction crews that accidentally hit a water main and turn a city street into a river. So, Herman, let us start with the basics. If I want to see what is under my house without a shovel, what is the go-to tool?
The most common one you will hear about is ground penetrating radar, or GPR. It is basically the same principle as the radar used for planes or weather tracking, but instead of sending radio waves into the air, you send them into the earth. You have a transmitter that sends out a pulse of high-frequency electromagnetic waves, usually in the range of 10 megahertz to several gigahertz. When those waves hit a boundary between two different materials with different dielectric constants, some of that energy reflects back to the surface.
Okay, let us pause there. Dielectric constants? That sounds like something I should have paid more attention to in high school physics.
It is just a fancy way of saying how well a material holds an electric charge. Think of it as electrical contrast. If you have dry sand, it has a low dielectric constant. If you have a metal pipe, it has an infinitely high one. When the radar wave hits that transition from sand to metal, it bounces back like a ball hitting a wall. If the materials are too similar, like a plastic pipe filled with water buried in very wet clay, the radar might not see the boundary at all. It just passes right through or gets absorbed.
So it is like an echo, but I imagine the ground is a lot noisier than the air. If I shout in an empty room, the echo is clear. If I shout into a pile of blankets, I get nothing. Is the ground like a pile of blankets?
That is a perfect way to put it. Soil is an incredibly messy medium. This brings us to the first big challenge, attenuation. Radio waves lose energy very quickly as they travel through the ground. The higher the frequency of the radar, the better the resolution. If you use a 2 gigahertz antenna, you can see a tiny copper wire, but you can only see it maybe 30 centimeters deep. If you want to see a tunnel 10 meters deep, you have to use a much lower frequency, like 100 megahertz, but then your image gets blurry. You might see that something is there, but you cannot tell if it is a gas line, a large rock, or a hollow space.
So there is a constant trade-off between depth and detail. But Daniel asked about bedrock. I assume rock is even harder to penetrate than soil?
Actually, it depends on the rock. Bedrock can be a double-edged sword. If it is very dense, dry limestone or granite, radar can sometimes move through it quite well because it is uniform. It is like looking through a piece of glass versus looking through a bowl of soup. But if the rock is conductive like certain types of shale, or if it is saturated with salt water, the radar signal just dies almost instantly. The energy gets absorbed and turned into heat before it can reflect back. This is why in some parts of the world GPR is amazing, and in others, like the clay-heavy soils of London or parts of the American South, it is practically useless.
That explains why you cannot just have a one-size-fits-all radar gun for the ground. But what about the other methods? I know the military uses more than just radar. If you are looking for a deep tunnel, like the ones Daniel mentioned on the borders, radar might not reach far enough, right?
Exactly. For those deep strategic tunnels, some of which can be 30, 40, or even 70 meters deep, you move into the world of seismic sensing and acoustic monitoring. Think of this as putting a giant stethoscope to the earth. When people are digging or even just walking in a tunnel, they create vibrations. These are called seismic waves. We use geophones, which are extremely sensitive sensors that can pick up tiny movements in the ground.
I remember reading about this. They can actually triangulate the position of the digging based on the time it takes for the vibration to reach different sensors. But that requires the person in the tunnel to be active. What if the tunnel is already there and no one is moving? How do you find a silent, empty space deep underground?
That is the holy grail of subterranean sensing. One method that has seen a lot of advancement recently is electrical resistivity tomography, or ERT. You stick a series of electrodes into the ground and pass a current between them. Air is a very poor conductor of electricity. It is an insulator. Soil and rock, especially if they have some moisture, are much better conductors. If there is a big empty tunnel between your electrodes, the electricity has to flow around it, which increases the resistance. By measuring these changes from hundreds of different electrode combinations, you can use a computer to reconstruct a cross-sectional map of the resistance.
It sounds like we are basically doing a CAT scan on the Earth. But I can see how that would be a nightmare in a city. You cannot just go around sticking electrodes into a busy street in the middle of Tel Aviv or New York.
You hit the nail on the head. The urban environment is the ultimate challenge for this tech. Daniel asked how tricky it is to detect a tunnel under a civilian population center, and the answer is incredibly tricky. In a city, you have what we call urban clutter. You have thousands of miles of existing pipes, power lines, old foundations, and discarded metal. All of these create false positives. If you are looking for a tunnel, how do you distinguish it from a 300-year-old sewer line that is not on any map?
Not to mention the noise. Between the buses, the light rail, and the constant construction, the ground must be vibrating like a drum kit. How do you filter out the sound of a truck on the street from the sound of someone digging 50 meters down?
That is where the heavy-duty math and artificial intelligence come in. This is a huge area of growth as of early 2026. Modern systems use advanced signal processing to filter out the background noise of the city. They use something called distributed acoustic sensing, or DAS. This is a brilliant trick where they use existing fiber optic cables, the ones that carry our internet, as a giant sensor array. By sending laser pulses down the fiber and measuring the tiny backscattered light, they can detect vibrations along the entire length of the cable. It turns the city's own infrastructure into a massive subterranean microphone.
Wait, so the fiber optic cable that is delivering this podcast to someone's house could also be listening to the vibrations of the street outside?
Precisely. It can detect the footfalls of a person, the weight of a passing car, or the rhythmic thud of a tunneling machine. By using AI to analyze these patterns, we can separate the normal city noise from the anomalous noise of a new tunnel being dug. But even with AI, it is not perfect. There is a reason why, even with all this high-tech gear, we still sometimes find tunnels that have been there for years. The Earth is a very good hiding place.
I want to go back to the bedrock issue for a second. Daniel mentioned penetrating radar against resistant materials. If you are dealing with solid granite, or the heavy limestone we have here in the Jerusalem Hills, does that change the game for the military versus a civilian contractor?
It definitely changes the stakes. For a civilian contractor trying to lay a new water main, if they hit bedrock, they usually just stop or use a massive diamond-tipped drill. But for the military, the bedrock is often where the tunnels are hidden because it is structurally stable. You do not need as much shoring up if you are tunneling through solid rock. To see through that, they might use something called Muon Tomography. This is one of my favorite nerdy technologies, and it has seen some incredible breakthroughs in the last couple of years.
Muon Tomography? That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Explain that.
It is actually based on cosmic rays. Muons are subatomic particles that are created when cosmic rays hit the upper atmosphere. They are constantly raining down on us, millions of them every minute. They are very heavy, about 200 times the mass of an electron, and they can pass through hundreds of meters of solid rock. However, they lose energy or get absorbed at different rates depending on the density of the material they pass through.
Wait, so you are saying we use particles from outer space to map things underground?
Precisely. It is like a natural X-ray machine where the X-rays come from the stars. You place muon detectors in a known location, like a basement, a deep shaft, or a subway tunnel. By measuring how many muons arrive from different angles, you can tell if they pass through solid rock or an empty space. If more muons arrive from a certain angle than expected, it means there is a hole or a tunnel in the rock above you. It was famously used to find a hidden chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza, and more recently, it has been used to monitor the internal structure of volcanoes and nuclear reactors.
That is incredible, but I assume you need a lot of time for that. You cannot just drive a truck over a spot and get a muon scan in 5 seconds.
No, it takes days or even weeks to gather enough data to build a clear picture. It is a passive technology, so you are at the mercy of the rate at which muons fall from the sky. But for finding a massive, permanent tunnel deep in bedrock, it is a game changer because it does not care about electrical interference or urban noise. It only cares about density.
So, we have GPR for shallow stuff, seismic for active digging, resistivity for finding voids, and muons for the deep, long-term stuff. Now, Daniel mentioned the trickle-down to civilian use. Where are we seeing this the most? Is it just for construction, or is there more to it?
Construction is the big one, but the implications are much wider. Think about critical infrastructure. We have aging water and gas systems in almost every major city in the world. Often, the maps for these pipes are decades old or just plain wrong. Every year, billions of dollars in damage are caused because someone hits a gas line they did not know was there. In the United States alone, there is an underground utility strike every few minutes. If we can use this military-grade sensing to create a perfect three-dimensional map of the underground, we prevent those disasters.
I can see that being a huge deal for smart cities. If the city has a digital twin of its underground, maintenance becomes proactive instead of reactive. You could see a sinkhole forming before the road actually collapses.
Exactly. Sinkholes are a perfect example. They usually start as a small void where soil is being washed away by a leaking pipe. By the time you see it on the surface, it is too late. The road has already swallowed a car. But with regular subterranean scanning, you could spot that void when it is only a few centimeters wide. It is like preventative medicine for the city. We are also seeing this in archaeology. In places like Rome or Jerusalem, you cannot dig a hole for a new building without hitting something ancient. These sensors allow archaeologists to map sites without ever picking up a trowel, preserving the history while allowing the modern city to function.
But what about the cost? Military tech is notoriously expensive. Is it actually feasible for a local municipality to run these kinds of scans regularly?
That is the big hurdle right now. A high-end GPR rig can cost $50,000 or more, and you need a highly trained expert to interpret the data. It is not like looking at a photograph, it is more like looking at a blurry ultrasound. But as the hardware gets cheaper and the AI gets better at interpreting the signals, we are seeing it become more common. There are companies now developing GPR units that can be mounted on the back of a standard garbage truck or a street sweeper.
That is a clever idea. The truck is already driving every street in the city once a week. If it is scanning the ground as it goes, you could build a massive, constantly updating map of the subterranean world without any extra effort.
Exactly. You just gather the data in the background and let a central server process it. Over time, you would see changes. If a pipe starts leaking, the soil moisture changes, which changes the radar reflection. The AI flags it and says, hey, something looks different at the corner of Main and 4th. That is the future of infrastructure management. We are moving from level D utility data, which is basically just looking at old paper records, to level A, which is precise, non-destructive verification.
I want to push back a little on the detecting tunnels under civilian areas part. If a group is building a tunnel in a dense city, they are probably aware of these technologies. How do you hide a tunnel from a GPR or a seismic sensor? Is there a stealth version of a tunnel?
Oh, absolutely. It is a constant cat and mouse game. To hide from seismic sensors, you can dig manually with hand tools instead of power tools, which is much quieter. To hide from GPR, you can line the tunnel with materials that absorb or scatter radio waves, similar to the stealth coating on a fighter jet. You can also dig very deep, beyond the effective range of most surface-based sensors. And in the city, you can hide the entrance inside a regular building, so there is no surface disruption to see from a drone or satellite.
It sounds like the sensing is only half the battle. You also need the intelligence to know where to look. You cannot scan every square inch of a country at high resolution.
That is the reality. The technology is a tool to confirm a suspicion or to monitor a specific high-risk area. It is rarely a magic find everything button. But what is interesting is how this necessity in Israel has led to the development of multimodal sensing. They do not just use one tool, they combine them. They will take GPR data, seismic data, and even satellite-based interferometry, which is called INSAR.
INSAR? What is that?
It stands for Interferometric Synthetic Aperture Radar. It is a satellite-based technology that can detect if the ground surface has moved by even a few millimeters. If you are digging a tunnel, even if it is deep, the ground above it often settles slightly. By comparing satellite images taken at different times, you can see these tiny subsidence bowls from space. When you combine that with ground-based sensors, you get a much clearer picture.
Combining all those layers must give a much clearer picture. It is like having a person's medical history, an X-ray, and a blood test all at once.
Precisely. And that brings us back to Daniel's question about the challenges of bedrock. One of the most difficult things about bedrock is that it is not always a solid slab. It has cracks, fissures, and underground rivers. Distinguishing a man-made tunnel from a natural cave or a fissure in the limestone is incredibly hard. I have seen data where a natural geological feature looked exactly like a reinforced concrete tunnel.
So, You end up digging a hole only to find a natural cave that has been there for 10,000 years.
It happens more often than you would think. In archaeology, this is a constant struggle. Here in Jerusalem, archaeologists use GPR all the time to find ancient walls or tombs. But they are constantly digging up things that turn out to be just a weird rock formation or an old pile of rubble from a different century. The Earth is a messy archive.
It is interesting that the same technology used to find a modern threat is also used to uncover our ancient past. It is like the technology is indifferent to the timeline. It just cares about density and boundaries.
That is a great way to put it. The physics does not care if the void was made by a king 3,000 years ago or a militant group 3 months ago. A hole is a hole. But the interpretation of that hole is where the human element comes in. We have to look at the context. Is it near a border? Is it under a historical site? Does it lead from a basement to a kitchen?
Let us talk about the accurate picture Daniel asked about. How accurate can we actually get? Can we see the difference between a copper wire and a fiber optic cable?
We are getting closer, but we are not there yet for deep sensing. At very shallow depths, like 30 centimeters, a high-frequency GPR can show you the individual rebar in the concrete slab. You can see the grid pattern perfectly. But once you get down to 3 or 4 meters, which is where most city infrastructure is, the resolution drops. You might see a target which shows up as a hyperbola on the screen, a sort of upside-down U shape. You know there is a pipe there, and based on the shape of that U, you can estimate its diameter and depth. But telling the difference between a PVC water pipe and a plastic conduit for fiber? That is still very difficult unless you have other clues.
What about the resistant materials Daniel mentioned? We talked about bedrock, but what about reinforced concrete? If someone builds a tunnel with thick concrete walls, does that make it easier or harder to find?
It is a bit of a paradox. Concrete is very dense, so it creates a very strong reflection for radar. In that sense, a concrete tunnel is louder than a dirt tunnel. However, concrete also blocks the signal from seeing anything inside the tunnel. It is like a mirror. You see the surface of the mirror very clearly, but you cannot see what is behind it. This is why through-wall imaging is a separate but related field. The military uses different frequencies, often in the ultra-wideband range, to try and see people moving inside a building or a bunker.
This really highlights the complexity. You are dealing with a medium, the Earth, that is opaque, non-uniform, and constantly changing with the weather. I imagine even a heavy rainstorm could mess up your readings.
Oh, absolutely. Water is the enemy of ground radar. Water is highly conductive and has a high dielectric constant. When the ground is soaked, it absorbs the radar pulses much faster. A site that was easy to scan in the dry summer might be completely opaque in the middle of winter. If you are trying to find a tunnel, you might want to do your scanning during a drought.
That is a detail I never would have thought of. The literal weather affecting our ability to see underground. So, Herman, if we look at the next 10 years, where is this going? Daniel asked about the potential applications. What is the killer app for subterranean sensing?
I think it is the autonomous underground. We are already seeing robots that can crawl through pipes to inspect them. But imagine a swarm of small, autonomous sensors that can be injected into the ground or move through existing conduits to map the entire area in real time. Combine that with the garbage truck mounted GPR we talked about, and we could finally have a transparent Earth. There is also a lot of excitement about quantum sensing.
Quantum sensing? You are just trying to win buzzword bingo now, Herman.
I promise it is a real thing. Researchers are working on quantum gravity sensors, specifically cold atom interferometers. These sensors are so sensitive that they can detect tiny variations in the Earth's gravitational field caused by a void underground. Unlike radar, gravity cannot be blocked or shielded. If there is a hole in the ground, it has less mass, and therefore less gravity. If we can make these sensors small and stable enough to put on a truck, we could find any tunnel, anywhere, regardless of what it is made of or how deep it is.
A transparent Earth. That is a powerful image. But it also raises some questions, doesn't it? If we can see everything underground, does that mean privacy is gone too? If I have a basement or a safe in my floor, is it suddenly visible to anyone with a scanner?
That is the dark side of X-ray vision. Right now, the tech is expensive and bulky enough that you would notice someone scanning your house. But if it becomes as small and cheap as a smartphone sensor, then yeah, the unseen parts of our homes might not be so unseen anymore. It is the same privacy debate we have with drones, just pointed in the opposite direction. We might need new laws about subsurface privacy.
It is always a trade-off. We want the safety of knowing there are no sinkholes or gas leaks, but we also want the privacy of our own foundations.
Exactly. But from a purely scientific and engineering perspective, the challenge is just beautiful. We are trying to overcome the fundamental opacity of the world. We are using every trick in the book, radio waves, sound waves, electricity, and even particles from the stars to see what nature has hidden.
It is a reminder that there is so much more to our environment than what we see on the surface. We are living on top of this incredibly complex machine that we built over centuries, and we are only just now getting the tools to see how it all fits together.
And that is why I love these prompts from Daniel. They take something that seems like a niche military problem and show how it is actually about the fundamental way we interact with our planet. Whether it is for security, history, or just making sure our toilets keep flushing, subterranean sensing is going to be one of those quiet technologies that changes everything.
It really is the ultimate hidden tech. So, thinking about the practical takeaways for our listeners, what should they keep in mind next time they see a crew out on the street with one of those little three-wheeled carts that looks like a lawnmower?
First of all, know that it is not a lawnmower. That is likely a GPR unit. And if you see them, realize they are doing a high-tech dance with physics. They are trying to interpret echoes from a messy, complicated world. And maybe give them a bit of credit. It is a lot harder than it looks to tell a rock from a pipe. They are essentially trying to paint a picture in a dark room using only a flashlight that barely works.
And for the city planners or engineers listening, the takeaway is that the digital twin of the underground is no longer science fiction. The tools are here, and the military has already done the hard work of proving they can work in the toughest conditions imaginable. The challenge now is data management.
Exactly. The trickle-down is happening right now. We are moving from a world where we guess what is underground to a world where we know, and that knowledge is going to save lives and billions of dollars in the long run. But we need to standardize how we store that data. If the gas company, the water company, and the telecom company all have their own secret maps, we are still going to have accidents.
We need a Google Maps, but for everything below zero elevation, a unified, transparent map of the underground. I can see that being the next big platform.
I would subscribe to that, though I hope they do not put ads in my sewer lines. This drainage pipe is brought to you by...
No, let us not go there. But seriously, the depth of this topic, no pun intended, is really impressive. From the border of Gaza to the streets of London, the challenges are the same. How do we see through the solid earth?
And as we have seen, the answer is, with a lot of difficulty and a lot of clever physics. Whether it is bedrock, urban noise, or just a lot of mud, we are slowly but surely peeling back the layers. It is a great time to be a geophysicist.
Well, Herman, I think we have covered a lot of ground today. We have looked at the how, the why, and the what is next for subterranean sensing. Daniel, thanks for this prompt. It really made us look at our neighborhood in a different way. I will never look at a manhole cover the same way again.
It definitely did. I will be looking at the pavement a lot more closely on my walk home today, wondering what kind of hyperbola is hiding under my feet.
And to our listeners, if you found this deep dive into the underground fascinating, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other people find the show and join our weird little community.
It really does. We love seeing the show grow and hearing what you all think about these topics. Your reviews are like the muons that help us map out where our audience is.
You can find all our past episodes, including our deep dives into infrastructure and technology, at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there for subscribers and a contact form if you want to reach out. You can also email us directly at showmyweirdprompts.com.
We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you listen to podcasts.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry.
We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.